What would be the most surprising round one pick the Dallas Cowboys could make? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast
Locked
Network, your
On.
team every day.
On. Locked on.
Cowboys.
Locked on. Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. We're getting closer and closer. I can almost feel the excitement. And we're starting to grind down. I was up late last night watching prospects. I'm kind of starting to get delirious at this point. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel. So we thought we'd change it up a little bit today and kind of go over some guys that we haven't really spoken a ton about. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some players that would be surprising round one picks for the Cowboys, but I want to start with this. Todd Archer today revealed that the Dallas Cowboys are bringing in Darnell Wright, the Tennessee right tackle, as a 30 visit just a couple weeks before the draft. He hasn't been somebody who has been mentioned before, but I got to be honest, it is a little bit surprising that the Cowboys, number one, would even bring him in thinking that he would be available. And number two, like, where would he fit in on this offensive line?
Well, look, there's a lot of seemingly unknown going on in the offensive line right now. You start with they have a new offensive line coach. We're not 100% sure exactly his preferences for some of this stuff. Obviously, we've all heard the rumors about Terrence Steele potentially getting some looks at left guard. This obviously is related to that somehow. There have been many people that have suggested that Darnell Wright could play a year at left guard, maybe while you're trying to figure out the offensive line situation. You draft him, put him at left guard. There are lots of folks out there that I really trust their opinions on that seem confident on it. It scares me a little bit. I do feel like, and we talked about it when we watched him. I do feel like the guy can play guard. I mean, I now have watched snaps of him doing so. I think his sophomore year or freshman year, maybe
Freshman year. Yep.
And he did play on the left side a little bit. And my concern was that the left side tape I saw of him playing wasn't great necessarily.
No.
I think it got better as the season went on, and that may have been a situation where he was kind of getting comfortable with what he was doing, and as the season got on, he got more comfortable. But having said that, would he have a similar sort of learning curve going from right tackle last season to left guard? I don't know. I love the player Darnell Wright. I certainly would love him as a right tackle. I feel like he could be a very, very good left guard, but there's just a lot of unknown there because I just don't know how well he's going to transition from that position to left guard where you're going to ask him to play full time. That worked out with Tyler Smith. Maybe it doesn't work out this time.
I will say this was the name that I was going to mention before we even got the news that he could be a 30 visit, because to me, he checks a lot of boxes that the Cowboys like. Like, typically, Will McClay and that scouting staff loves tackles that they can kick inside the guard.
Yep.
Check. Big school production. Check.
Yep.
Multiple years of experience. Check. Played multiple positions. I've got the numbers right here. 27 starts at right tackle, 13 starts at left tackle, 2 starts at right guard. He's got NFL power, 333 pounds, went to the Senior Bowl, performed really well there. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising that the Cowboys have interest in him.
No, they shouldn't. It shouldn't be surprising that the Cowboys have interest. I think the surprising aspect for the Cowboys is the fit, and just that it would be not only a move from tackle to guard, but right tackle to left guard. So it's a big, shift in your brain. So, I think as far as the player goes, I mean, he's incredible. You just throw on his tape versus Alabama, watch him shut down Will Anderson for four quarters. So
I will say the one thing the Cowboys have done a really good job of is not drafting just for one season, right? Like, for example, when they drafted CeeDee Lamb back in 2020, they just signed Amari Cooper to a big contract. Michael Gallup was just coming off the best year of his career, and they still took a round one receiver. I know it's a little crowded in the offensive line room right now, but just imagine what it could look like in 2024 when Terrence Steele is a free agent, Tyron Smith's contract expires, Tyler Biotish, his contract expires. Plus, we just don't never know with Zach Martin, right? Like he could retire at any point. So it looks crowded now. It could be wide open by 2024, 2025. And maybe that's why Wright does make some sense here.
Yeah, I mean it certainly makes sense in the long-term planning aspect. My concern is once again, are the Cowboys misaligning where they're going all in on, right? Like you get a Brandon Cooks, you get a Stephon Gilmore, and only to potentially take a step back at the offensive line if you put a guy who hasn't played guard in 2 years in at left guard as your starter next year. I listen. I'm all for, and I'm not against Darnell Wright being drafted and put at left guard at all. I want to be clear here, but there is a level of uncertainty and unknown that, again, I think that we are kind of brushing off and looking past because, rightfully, because the Cowboys have done a better job of moving these guys around these last few years. That has part of it, but I think but we have to keep in mind that that's still not an easy job, and there is a difference between asking Tyler Smith to squeeze into left guard from left tackle as opposed to going to the other side of the line and playing. That's closer to what La'el Collins had to deal with. I mean, La'el Collins was a left tackle in college. Ended up playing left guard, but I think he kind of bounced back and forth a little bit, and even then, La'el struggled early on to kind of get things going at left guard and kind of understand all the footwork and hand placement and everything. So I just want to kind of caution everyone. There's not like, even though Darnell Wright is a first round talent, no doubt. I think that there's not as much certainty that you're going to get that high level play, especially early on at left guard, that you would at right tackle.
I will still say I would be surprised if the Cowboys picked him at 26. I mean, it's just it's not the cleanest fits. Like we talked about Steve Avila, the TCU offensive lineman. That one just makes a lot more sense on paper, right? Because he played left guard last year. He's played center before. It's easy to project him at the next level with the Cowboys. Not with Darnell Wright, but at the same time, I think Wright is widely considered a better player.
Prospect,
so,
sure.
So how do you weigh those two things? I think that's what the Cowboys have to figure out. Let's talk about some other potential surprises in round one for Dallas next. This episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM app. You've heard us talk about this mobile game before. And if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM trying to figure out some of the problems that we're trying to figure out, like where would you line Darnell Wright up at, you should give this game a try. It's not quite as easy as you think to create a dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build an historic dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're going to be responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries, terms. You're going to go through free agency, draft, player personnel issues, locker room issues, and all the ups and downs of the season. All of this in a challenging but realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want to and when you want to. Locked On Cowboy listeners will get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all in caps, in the game store. That is Locked On, all in caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That is ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Landon, let's talk about some surprising picks the Cowboys could make in round one. Why don't you go ahead and go first?
All right, this is not so much a surprising player because the stock is appropriate, and the position maybe just because we've talked about this, but we haven't talked about other defensive end prospects that could potentially be picks at 26. This would be a situation where think Micah Parsons, right? Where we didn't hear anything about Parsons.
Nothing.
Any interest about that? It just kind of came out of nowhere. What if suddenly we got to 26 and the Cowboys ran up and drafted Felix Anaduke-Uzomah from
Yes.
Kansas State?
Just watched this tape yesterday. I'm glad you brought him up.
So he's a guy that, I mean, I watched a little bit, but the Cowboys I just haven't heard a ton of interest here, and
Yes.
I know the Cowboys potentially met with them at the combine, but he's a guy that wins with bend. He's the kind of pass rusher that this team would love, especially on the edge. He's athletic. He can run under. He can set the edge on the in the run game. I think he's a guy that would come in and be sort of. I mean, honestly, I saw a lot of DeMarcus Lawrence in this game.
Yeah.
Where I feel like he could bulk up and put another 10 pounds on and just be a huge power end. And he's not exactly a guy that is ready to kind of play that every down situation quite yet, but he has the bend and the athleticism that I think that if you put some more weight on him, you get him into an NFL weight room with the year on him, he'll be able to kind of potentially take a starting role down the road as the opposite end off of Parsons, I think.
Yep.
And I think right away he can come in and give you some pass rushing from the edge and be semi-productive and just kind of as part of a rotation of what is already a very deep class. The reason it would be surprising is obviously the Cowboys have a lot here in stock.
Yep.
But I think as far as where the Cowboys pick and value goes, he would be someone that would make sense on that realm, but would probably be surprising to a lot of Cowboys fans if his name was called at 26.
Yeah, we have not talked about him at all, but I don't think he's all that dissimilar to like Jermaine Johnson, who went in the first round last year. That was getting a lot of top like 10, 15 buzz, ended up falling to like pick 27 or 28 in that range. I could see it. If you just watch like his 10 best rushes, they're as good as anybody in this class.
He runs under the table, man. Like,
oh my gosh,
it's nuts.
Yep.
Like, it's crazy.
So I think that's a good one. Now I don't know. I don't know if Dallas would value him more than somebody like, let's say, Will McDonald, but
yeah,
he's quite a bit younger. And I agree with you. I think he does have the frame. I think he measured in at like 255 at the combine or something. I think he could play at like 270 3 years from now.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think he has some room to grow just if you look at his body makeup as it stands right now. And again, I think the reason that it would be surprising is because of what we just talked about. We've talked so much about Nolan Smith being someone who could potentially fall. We talked about Will McDonald and the fact that Quinn went out and worked him out specifically. I think it's, we are already kind of a little bit surprised that the Cowboys are potentially looking at defensive ends this early as it is.
Sure.
I think it would be extra surprising if we got all thrown for a loop and it was an edge that was picked at 26, just not the one that we've been hearing about.
The name for me that I want to talk about is Emmanuel Forbes, the cornerback from Mississippi State. Yep. Now the Cowboys met with him. It seems like we really haven't talked about corner as a spot the Cowboys could go in round one. We've been more interested in the Corey Trice, in round 3 and, some of those type of guys, but maybe Dallas just looks at the cornerback situation like this. Trevon Diggs is going into the final year of his contract. Stephon Gilmore going into the final year of his contract. Jordan Lewis going into the final year of his contract. Who knows with Kelvin Joseph and Nashawn Wright? Like, we're going into year 3 for both those guys. I wouldn't be shocked if one or both of those guys just didn't make the roster next year for whatever reason. And you draft somebody with outrageous SEC production, 14 interceptions. He's got the size that they like, right? Hold on. Well, he's got the height that they like.
Yeah, there you
go. Got the length that they like, 32-inch arms, right? And they just feel like, hey, we don't need him right now, but let's kind of work him into the lineup, see if we can get him up to 177 by the end of the year. And by 2024, he's one of our starting outside corners.
Yeah, you better start planning right now for your 2024 plans on how to defend the run on the edge, because if Emmanuel Forbes is out,
I mean, they don't care.
Yeah, because if Emmanuel Forbes is out there at corner and Trevon Diggs is at the opposite corner, they're going to run the football at these guys all day long.
Yeah.
So I listen. We've talked about Forbes about his shortcomings specifically on in the weight room, and I don't mean the
Yeah.
lifting weight room. I mean in the room where he gets weighed. He, look, it's everything about him except for that. It seems to be kind of checks all the boxes, right? I mean, he's a playmaker. He gets his hands on the balls like at a rate that's unprecedented for anyone else who's coming out in the draft. I do feel like it would be tough. I mean, again, to kind of you almost are taking a redshirt corner.
You
I
are.
mean, I think he would be obviously be able to play and come onto the field and kind of rotate in some nickel and dime situations. But I have a very, very hard time believing that he cracks the starting lineup.
Well,
I have a very
and that's what's so weird about it. Why it would be surprising is
Yeah.
can you think of the last first round pick that the Cowboys have made that they really didn't pencil in as a starter as soon as they drafted him?
No. And I don't know that they are interested in doing something like that. And that may be why you don't take, Forbes at 26, even if he is there, because, look, you get 5 years of this. I mean, with the first round pick, with the 5th year option, but I mean, if he's not ready to play his first year, then you're losing the cheapest year of that value.
Yeah.
And then you also, on top of that, are losing a year of evaluation as to whether you want to sign him for your 5th year option. So I can understand it's dicey. And I feel like if you try to pull something like this off, you could end up really, really, burning yourself, because those first round picks, it's not just that you bust on the player, it's an opportunity cost that you've
Yes,
lost.
100%.
That's a big thing.
If it was me running the Cowboys, I probably just wouldn't consider Forbes in the first round. Not only because you have a lot of corners, but because there's some scary parts to him, right? Like he would be such a big outlier. At the same time, we know how much Dan Quinn values turnovers and playmaking. And if you could get him up to 178, 179, and you have Diggs and Forbes and Gilmore as your 3 outside corners,
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Now you can match up with any team in the league when it comes to wide receivers. It's fascinating. Landon, let's continue to run through some more potential surprises in round 1 next. All right, we're back here, Landon, talking about potential round 1 surprises for the Dallas Cowboys. You got another one?
Yeah, I mean, this one is a pin throw name, and I really hope that this is not the case. We have talked a little bit about this guy. We haven't had a lot of positive things to say, but if Keely Ringo ends up being the pick at 26, I would be pretty upset. I do think that, based on the combine, not the combine, his pro day numbers, which came in and kind of revealed a little bit more of what we see on, at least what I see on tape. He has some speed to him, but the athleticism is not universal, right? It's kind of in a very sort of siloed way. I just didn't see it with this guy when I watched the tapes, the way that I was expecting to, because I remember Keely Ringo previously, watching him in the 2021 season. Felt like he was a pretty good player. I didn't see a ton of development here. I saw a very limited player. I think he can, get drafted and probably, thrive as far as relative to his ceiling in the Dan Quinn system. But I guess my issue would be, I feel like you could have easily gotten him later on in the draft, or a 95% version of him 2 or 3 rounds later in the draft. Just that isn't named Keely Ringo. It doesn't have the name association with it. This is a guy that I'm nervous, just because, like I said, he's starting to see his name drift down a little bit, but this is a guy that I'm nervous that the Cowboys are going to view as, oh, he's just such a great fit, and we don't know if he's going to last to 58, and they feel like they have to pull the trigger. He's just a guy that I just don't see it with.
I don't see it with either. The one thing that I will say is he doesn't really hit their threshold that they like for outside cornerbacks, arm length. They usually like 32 or 32 and a half. He was 31 and a fourth. So I do wonder if that kind of on top of that, 7-2-1 3 cone.
But that's how he plays, right? Like that's what you see how he plays. I mean, he's a silo corner. He's a cover 1, cover 3 corner. like you don't want him chasing dig routes inside. You want him running up the field with speedy receivers. He can do that part.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, I got two more names for you before we go.
Let's hear it. Let's
What
hear it.
one is somewhat realistic, and the other one is just a total shot in the dark. So we know last year that the Cowboys actually took a lower ranked player on their board in the first round because they passed on Lewisine, who they had a high grade
Mm.
on at safety. What if Brian Branch is there for
Mm.
them at pick 26? Right now in the consensus board, he's fallen a little bit, but he's around 20, 21, 22. What if the Cowboys take Brian Branch, who has gotten rave reviews from Nick Saban? They look at their safety depth chart, and while obviously we love it right now, Malik Hooker, his contract expires at the end of the year. He's also not been the most durable safety. Ron Curse, his contract expires at the end of the year. He was hurt all last year. He's in his 30s now. They look at Brian Branch as a Minka Fitzpatrick level safety who can play in the slot, who can play too high, who can play single high, and it's just too good of a player to pass up.
I mean, I could see it. Obviously the fit for this year is the difficult part because you've already I mean, that room is very full.
But at
I-
the same time, we've seen Dan
yeah,
Quinn use a lot of safety. So if the
absolutely.
goal is to have three safeties on the field all the time, he's a pretty good guy to move around, and you can mix him and match him depending on the team.
I like the general fit of this player in Dan Quinn's system because I think he's versatile. You can use him in a lot of different ways. I think he can kind of straddle a little bit uh, of the Hooker and Wilson role, and do
Yeah.
a little bit of each if he needed to. Um, again, like I do feel like it's and I think the reason that it would be surprising is because the room is very full, and I
Yeah.
do think you're right that I think that Quinn would be able to find a way to leverage this player. I question the resource allocation though
I
because
agree. I
it,
agree.
and I think he's a guy that again matches value where the Cowboys are picking, but I think and I think it would fit in the system, but I think drafting a first round safety in general is and then on top of that, you've got already several good players that you like here. And the first year fit, they could make it work. They
Yeah.
could find a way. He would get on the field. Like that's not the issue. But I just think that it's
still safety, right?
yeah, and it's still forcing it a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's for a safety, which I feel like
Unless they just had a monster grade on him. Like they
yeah.
just had like, hey, this is a top 10 player on our board. We're at 26. He's the only first round graded player. Let's take him. I wouldn't love it, but I think I could understand it a little bit.
I think I could understand it a little bit more if he was a little bit more of an elite athlete,
Yeah. But he's
And,
probably not falling to you at that point, right?
no, that probably not. And look, I'm not knocking Branch. I think he's an incredible player. I think he's one of these not quite as athletic, but he's so heady that it makes up for it in a lot of ways kind of players. Yeah, I mean, if you're drafting a safety in the first round, like I need somebody with more athletic upside, especially if I'm having to kind of ham fist him into my safeties room. I think that's too
Yeah.
many hurdles to go over to draft.
I agree. All right, last one. This is the biggest reach of them all on the consensus board, on everything you look at. However, does fit a lot of things the Cowboys need. If the Cowboys are dead set on improving their interior defensive line room, what about Gervin Dexter from Florida? I know he's somebody we haven't talked about on this podcast yet, but 6'6", 320 pounds, ran a 4.88 40-yard dash. We know Dan Quinn has ties with Florida. I think he's really got a long ways to go as a pass rusher, as a run defender. But there's not many guys that are that big and that athletic, and there's just no way he makes it to you in a second round. So
Has
if you're
he gotten off the snap yet from the last
no,
play that is
no,
that
no,
he
and
played in?
that's the issue. But man, if you want to take a risk and hope you're finding like the next Chris Jones, it might be him.
Yeah, I mean, there's some Brian Breesy elements to this, right?
Yeah.
Where there's a ton of circumstance here. This is a guy that was incredibly well thought of coming out of high school, and just kind of for whatever reason didn't quite develop. Look, I mean, well, yeah, it's Florida, so I, I was gonna say Florida State. We've had problems with Florida State. It's Florida State that the defensive line problems that we've had.
Florida's had some of the same issues, though.
Yeah, that's true. Look, I think that's extremely rich for him, and I could see it simply because it could be one of those situations where, he seems like exactly the kind of guy that that teams are going to like a lot more than draft nicks, because they're going to have a lot more information on this guy than we do, right? And they're going to kind of go, like we said, look back to like, high school numbers and say, hey, this is a guy that is a good player that, everyone thought was a good player, coming into college, and just didn't have the kind of career that he thought. But I just think that Dexter, to me, at 26 is like, that's an extreme reach. Just because
I agree.
I don't even think the value is there, like, that you need to take him at 26. Look, I'll say this. I'll lump in Brian Breesy here because I don't know that it would be surprising if Breesy was the pick.
Yeah.
Necessarily. But I think in the sense that you're really, really, really trusting your scouting department here.
Heck yeah.
You're really, really trusting your scouting. Not that we shouldn't, because we have a very good scouting department, but you're really, really taking a risk on a guy that doesn't have a lot of proven tape that you can lean on to kind of feel good about. In fact, with Gervin Dexter, he's got a lot of bad tape.
Most of it's bad. Yeah.
Breesy, at least, he looks like a guy who has been dealing with a lot of stuff off the field and maybe looks tired or out of shape, which it can be explained with circumstance. With Dexter, you better have a plan for what you're doing, especially in a one gap system, for how you're going to improve by 2,000% his get off, because his get off is one of the worst I've seen a defensive tackle have. And you're going to ask him to kind of go into a one gap system where that's the basis of his whole play.
It's terrifying.
That's scary to me.
However, here is the list, and this is why he's going to get drafted as high as he is. Here's the list of defensive tackles over 310 pounds that ran a sub 5-second 40-yard dash. Dontari Poe, Muhammad Wilkerson, Marcel Darius, Deron Payne, Jordan Davis. And that is the entire list. And every single one of those guys outside of Jordan Davis, who we just haven't seen enough yet, has been a good NFL player. I think he's going to be a top 40 pick, despite his tape saying late day 2, early day 3. With the Cowboys having a need at defensive tackle, it would be surprising, but it's possible.
Well, look, here's the other part of this, right? Is that defensive tackle is notoriously incredibly difficult to develop. So you can't really blame Florida necessarily for not getting this guy up to par the way he probably should have, based on his high school rankings, that sort of thing. Look, defensive tackle is just it's a difficult position to feel like you've got a sure thing when you draft it. There's so many busts, like the bust road is littered with defensive tackles. So
and if you're a sure thing, you're going top 5 or 6, right?
Yep, exactly. And even if you are a sure thing, you may not go top 5 or 6 because whisper campaigns that are having you drive down. So I don't know. Trade up for Jalen Carter. If he falls out of top 10, trade up for Jalen Carter. I definitely would feel better about that than trying to draft get Dexter in the top 26 picks.
All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL Scouting Show with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'd like to thank you for checking out our podcast. Please go subscribe on YouTube. Watch us over there. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you guys next time.